Rick Brunson, welcome to the show.
Ben, thanks for having me on, bud.
I'm happy to have you. I will say that every person I've talked to says that you're the wisest person that they know. So,
Yeah, don't believe, you know what they say, don't believe half of what you hear and all of what you see, or what vice versa, whatever.
well, hopefully we can prove that wrong here.
Okay.
Awesome. So, you've spent the past 40 years immersed in journalism and communication, uh, both in your newsroom and in a classroom. Looking back, what has that journey taught you about how news media really works?
That's a great question. And first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate being here with you and getting a chance to talk with you about all these things and anything you want to talk about. Yeah, you're right. So everybody can see I'm old. I'm getting ready to turn 65, and I've been either a professional journalist or a journalism educator now for goodness, going on 43 years. So I actually went to school here at UCF. I'm sitting in my office at UCF today. I came to UCF to study journalism and got my degree in sociology with a minor in journalism back in 1984. And just real briefly, just sort of take the run through, and then maybe that will throw a little context on what I'm going to say. I started, my first job was as an obituary writer for a small newspaper in Sanford, the Sanford Herald, which is still printing. By the way, you can still get the Sanford Herald. And my first job was as an obituary writer, which was absolutely the best first job I could have had after graduation as a professional journalist, because when you're writing what is truly the last story about someone's life this side of heaven or hell, um, it it really enforces the ultra importance of accuracy in getting that person's story right. People clip out obituaries and laminate them and stick them in family Bibles or on the refrigerator or pass them among family members, because they're a lasting testament of what this person's life was about. And so, as a young person, coming out of college, with youth comes cockiness, and you have the rest of your life in front of you, and you think you're going to live forever, and then every day in your job you're dealing with people who are in grief and in the absolutely worst uh, moment of their lives because they've lost a loved one, and you're sitting there asking them about their loved one, and to share their their story with you so you can put it in the paper. And so it humbled me, which was humility is a great place to always start from, no matter what your field of endeavor. And it taught me the importance of accuracy, and it really taught me the importance of empathy and compassion in journalism, because you end up dealing with a lot of people who are in traumatic situations. So that was the very best first job I could have had. It was a master's degree in the human condition and got me off to a really great start. And then beyond that, I basically burned up the I-4 corridor working at newspapers in Daytona, in Tampa, and then coming back home to Orlando to work for the Orlando Sentinel um, for a number of years. And then um, around 2003, I got an invitation to apply for a job, 2002, to apply for a job as a journalism educator out at UCF, where I, learned the craft. And one of the faculty members was retiring, and I had adjuncted a few classes out here. And so they said, "Hey, Rick, why don't you apply?" And I did. And lo and behold, I got hired. And so I've been here since 2003. But along the way, I've kept working in journalism, because journalism kind of like the mafia, you never really get to leave. So i I've along the way I've worked in various roles part-time. uh, I kind of transitioned into broadcast journalism and worked for a number of years and still do some work with WFTV Channel 9, our ABC affiliate here in Central Florida, as a writer and a writing coach. Um, Last spring, I was granted professional development leave by the university, which is a great program. They let you not teach for a semester and return to your field so you can stay fresh and knock the rust and barnacles off your experience. And so I worked in radio and podcasting for a semester at Central Florida Public Media, WMFE, here in Central Florida, which is about 3 miles from our campus. So I've worked in as a magazine freelance writer. So 40 years of doing that. What has it taught me is that the fundamentals of journalism have never been more important. And what I keep going back to, Ben, and what I start you know, my journalism 101 principles of journalism course on Monday nights. I teach it every semester. I usually have between 100 and 150 students in there. I always go back to Madison. James Madison, as everybody knows, wrote the First Amendment. This is the guy. If you want to know what the First Amendment is supposed to mean, you have court precedent, of course, but then you also can go back to the guy who wrote it and what Madison wrote in 1800 and what is called the report that anybody can find in the National Archives online database is he wrote this, and this is almost a direct verbatim quote. A free press is that right of freely examining public men and public measures and fostering free communication among the people, without which you have no other right. A free press's job is to defend every one of our other four freedoms that are in the First Amendment, whether it's freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to peaceably assemble, freedom to complain to our government and seek redress of grievances. When the press is doing its job the right way, it is a champion of not only its own freedom to inspect and scrutinize whoever is holding power at the moment. That's our job primarily. It's not to entertain people. It's not to get people outraged, ginned up, tell them what they already believe to be true. Not our job. Our job is to scrutinize public men and public measures and foster free communication, just like we're doing here today. So, we're upholding journalism by having, free communication here, upon which Madison said, without this, there is no other right. So a free press has to defend and champion those other freedoms in the First Amendment by doing its primary central role. So that's what I teach. That's what I keep going back to over and over and over and over again, whether that's in a newspaper in the format of a television newscast or a radio or podcast broadcast. That's the job. That's the foundation. That's why our founders put a free press in the very First Amendment to the Constitution. It's that important. And it's so important that we do that job and fulfill that function properly, correctly, and courageously.
That's really good. Yeah. I'm kind of curious, what was your experience like working in news? Like, what does that job look like? So someone who works in the news media.
Stressful. It's completely deadline driven work, completely deadline driven. The press has to roll on time. The story has to publish on time. The newscast has to air on time, whether that's on television or radio. So it's completely deadline driven. So especially in the advent of the digital revolution that we're living in, where news is 24/7 and constant. It's relentless. And so the deadlines are constant. This is one thing that has really changed. When I was a newspaper reporter and editor, at the end of the night after the presses had run, I'd tuck that thing under my arm and walk into the night and look up in the stars and feel the satisfaction that I had made something, along with a bunch of other people. We'd made a newspaper. Um, and then I went home and I didn't have to worry about it again until the next day. Now, with the 24/7 news cycle that we're in, it's constant. That feeling of, stoppage, break, start again, is gone, and it's constant. And you almost have to make intentional choices to put my phone in the sock drawer and turn it off, or whatever you have to do to get some rest and some peace from it. Otherwise, it's just constant. The news cycle is constant and relentless.
Hmm. A lot of it sounds like it's a lot of, especially since it's moved to the 24-hour news cycle. It's a lot of constant, like, you gotta
Keeping up,
this story and this is breaking and this happened and there's so much that's going on all at once.
it
Um,
is. I think to your question, what it's like to work in it. I've always enjoyed it because fundamentally a journalist is a storyteller, just like a filmmaker is a storyteller. It's like a podcaster is a storyteller. Stories are the way humans have always tried to communicate meaning. Going back to, looking in the caves in France from 5,000 years ago and people drawing chalk drawings on the side of the wall of, where they went hunting that day. I mean, we've constantly told stories around the campfire. We're driven by stories. Stories give us meaning. You and I are both Christians. Look at the New Testament. Look at Jesus's ministry. He told stories. He gave parables. That's how he communicated truth. And it's been the same way for me as a journalist. You are telling stories every day. It's telling stories of people in your community, in the world, what they're going through, what has happened, and that has been the most satisfying part of it for me is the privilege of sharing other people's stories, whether it's in the written word or whether it's a microphone and you're doing it with audio or with a camera, with still or video photography. You're telling stories, and stories, when they're well told, are meaningful and help people make sense of the world that's going on around them. So that's been the coolest part of it. And the other great part of it is that, for the most part, are the people that you get to do the job with. Uh, Journalists are some of the most dedicated people that I've had the privilege of knowing and working with. There's a few jerks, there's a few cranks that you meet. There's some, a handful of people, like every profession. I look back and I'm like, man, they were a challenge. But for the most part, the professionals that I've worked with are very dedicated to their craft and to getting it right. They make mistakes. Um, we're like bartenders. Bartenders break more glasses than regular people because you handle more glass. Well, when you're a journalist, you're dealing with more information and more facts, and you drop one, you break one with a fair degree of frequency. When you do, you got to make it right. Um, but for the most part, the folks I've worked with have been really, really dedicated and have been the best part of the job, telling stories and the people you tell the stories with.
hmm. Yeah, going back to the James Madison quote you were saying, where the press's job uh, is to like encourage free speech among people and to be a platform people can use. Sort of being able to, I mean, as you said, like humans sort of communicate in the language of stories, and so when journalists can communicate stories effectively and well, they can they're able to move, I guess, free speech further along because the better stories you can tell or the more impactful stories you can tell will influence everyone around you.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And the press in our history, in American history, another has not always been great at that. So, another Madison quote that I love is that, you know, to the press alone, as checkered as it is with abuses. I love that phrase. As checkered as it is with abuses, is to be regarded as one of the primary means that we've had of moving humans along toward reason and to fight oppression. And it's funny, presidents always love the press until they become president and they have to face the press. And it's like, Thomas Jefferson famously said, you know, if I had to make a choice between a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would gladly choose the latter. And then he became president. And he got savaged by the press in his own time. And then he said, never believe what you read in the newspaper. So it's, but again, a free press's job is to scrutinize public men and public measure. If they have power and they're putting ideas and policies forward, it's the press's job to scrutinize that for on behalf of the public. One of the stories that I did last spring for the radio station, part of my job was to cover the Florida legislature. And there was a measure, like there has been for the past 3 years, brought forward to lower the age of purchasing a firearm from 21 to 18. After the Parkland massacre, Governor Scott and the legislature, they raised the age to 21. The shooter at Parkland was 19. And sadly, it tends to be a lot of these mass shootings we have tend to be done by, young guys who get a gun and they're angry or they're messed up in the head and they shoot places. So anyway, the state at that time, after Parkland, raised the age to 21. And for the last 3 years, there's been a move in the legislature to lower that back down to 18. So my job was to scrutinize the people who were putting that forward and the measure itself. In doing that, I found voices that were putting it forward who supported it, and I found an equal number of voices of people who opposed it and the reasons they did. And I put it on air. I put it online. I was very proud of that story, and it had a lot of reaction. I don't put my thumb on the scales about what I think about whether it should pass or not. I'm not a legislator. I'm a journalist. My job is to alert people about it so they know what the debate is about. And so getting back and doing that kind of reporting is what I love. Ultimately, it passed in the House. The Senate leadership did not let the bill come forward, and it died. I think it'll probably come up again next year. But it was very meaningful to talk to people who wanted to see the age lowered for their reasons, and people who didn't want it lowered for their reasons, and to share that openly, honestly, fully with my audience. I feel like I'm, in my role and in my groove as a member of this republic when I'm doing journalism like that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You've mentioned that when you did sort of your campaigning, you have a ton of people that are for this gun lowering age, and then a ton of people who are against it.
Right.
And so I think that's true kind of across the board with topics. You sort of have a bunch of news sources that will say one thing, and then a bunch of other news sources that will say something else. With that being said, do you think objective journalism is something that's possible, like just reporting facts that everyone agrees on without bias? And is that even like good journalism, or what is that?
I love that question, Ben, because you've touched on a debate that's been going on in the journalism profession now for at least a good 10 years. And that is objectivity possible? And is it even worth trying to achieve? And here's where I stand on that. And here's where what I teach. To me, objectivity is not a state of being. It's a methodology. Because none of us are completely unbiased. All of us have our biases because of where and how we were raised, the families we were raised in, our education. We all bring biases to the table. We all do. I have my biases, you have yours. But so what it means to me to be an objective journalist means, number one, you become aware of your biases going into a story, and you make a very strong intentional effort to check them and make sure in your selection of sourcing, for example, that you're not just picking people who confirm your biases. We call that confirmation bias. And that's going to skew and slant the story and not serve the reader, listener, or viewer. So when I go into a story like the gun age story, guns, people have really sharp, strong feelings about guns among a lot of our political issues. I need to make sure that number one, I'm aware of my own biases going in. I'm a gun owner. I was raised by a man who spent part of my dad was a military service member. Part of those years he spent as a cop. So I don't want to say how many guns in my house because I don't want people burglarizing my but I've been around guns for most of my life. I'm comfortable with them. I went to a gun range to capture sound to tell the story. Um, so I want to make sure I'm not putting my thumb on the scale because I'm a gun owner, um, one way or the other. So becoming aware of your biases, uh, and then intentionally making sure that you are speaking to the people who are in the best position to know what they're talking about on any given issue. So you're going to talk to people not only who are putting this measure forward, but you're going to talk to people who have been on the other end of it. They're one of the voices strongly against it was a woman in Parkland whose husband lost his life at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. So she's going to have really strong opinions about it. I made sure her voice was heard. So um, objectivity is a method. It's not a state of being, because I don't think any of us can be truly, completely 100% objective in the way we think about everything. But as a journalist, I can exercise a professional obligation to be fair and to be honest and to make sure in my source selection that I'm choosing to reach out to and get the voices and perspectives of people on both sides of an issue. Sometimes there are more than two sides. Sometimes there's three or four sides of an issue. And if I'm being an objective journalist, I'm making sure that in my methodology of gathering factual information, that I'm reaching out to as many sides as I can, and then representing those perspectives and those views fairly and within context.
Hmm. So, would you say that objectivity isn't necessarily a you're only speaking like it's a way of like a set order of how to do things? It's more of
It is.
you're just it is
It is.
okay.
It's part of our epistemology. So every field, every discipline, academic or professional, has an epistemology, a methodology for how it determines what is actual knowledge. Biology has the scientific method. The field of law has the rules of evidence. In journalism, our methodology is threefold. Number one, you talk to the people who are in the best position to know what the public needs to know. So, experts, eyewitnesses, no matter the topic, you go and try to find the person who has the most knowledge and experience on any given topic. Now, that includes regular citizens. If you live in a trailer in Bithlow and your trailer just got toppled by a tornado and you survived, you are an expert on what just happened to you. So if I'm telling that story, I'm gonna talk to the lady who survived the tornado, and I'm going to talk to the meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Melbourne about the tornado. So you talk to the people who are in the best position to know. That's method number one. Method number two is data and documents. So it's really hard to make math lie. 32 degrees is freezing cold no matter what you and I feel about it. The data is the data. Um, Public records, we're blessed to live in a state like Florida that which has a pretty strong public records law, although the legislature keeps chipping away at it more and more each year. We're called the Sunshine State. We have a sunshine law. The records laws are fairly good here. You can find out data on about just about anything, and so you look at the numbers. What story do the numbers tell? And then the third part of our methodology or our epistemology is to go to the scene yourself. Go to see and witness with your own eyes what we call the facts on the ground. Go and see for yourself and be a witness and be an honest witness. So those three tracks of our methodology: interview people in the best position to know, data and documents, and going to the scene to see the facts on the ground for yourself, is going to get us to a position where we can report truth with a small t, the best obtainable version of the truth in that moment. And that's what we call news. So if we follow those three tracks faithfully, honestly, we're going to get a pretty decent news report that we can share with our audience and let them know what's going on in their community, state, nation, and world.
Awesome. Thank you. I really like that definition, sort of expertise plus data plus firsthand experience all combined is objectivity. That's really good. Yeah, I like that. Have so off kind of going off of that,
Mhm.
how have you observed uh, media coverage shape young people's understanding of so sort of their identity, belonging in the world, maybe their view on the culture, the society, the government.
Wow, you've laid bare the jugular of where we're at right now, Ben. And uh, you know, speaking of data, some really good data that I rely on when it comes to media coverage is from the Pew Research Foundation, which is a nonpartisan social science polling agency in the Northeast. Pew, people can look it up, pewresearch.org, especially the Pew Organization for the People in the Press. They track how people consume news. And when it comes to young people, what we know now is that most young people overwhelmingly get their news from social media, not necessarily traditional formats of news. They certainly aren't picking up an ink on Dead Trees newspaper. They're not, they're not watching the 6 o'clock news on TV. They're not listening to the radio. They listen to a lot of podcasts, which is just radio to me by another means, but they're not getting their news from traditional sources of media like older Americans still tend to do. They're getting on social media. And what's concerning about that to me, and take this with a grain of salt, again, I'm an old person. I'm on social media, been on it for a long time, but social media, as we all know, is completely run by algorithms. And so, you know, the people that run social media organizations have set algorithms so that what you see is what you tend to look at. So what this has created, I'm afraid, and we're kind of seeing this, is that we've all are living in these social media bubbles that confirm the way we already see the world. I mean, I've seen this. I subscribe to Apple News on my phone, and I can tell, if I read an article from the conservative National Review magazine, I start seeing more articles from the National Review popping up in my feed. If I read more an article or two from the New York Times, which leans left, I'm going to start seeing more articles from the New York Times showing up in my feed. But I'm intentional. I mean, I read left and right and middle. Most people aren't that intentional. I mean, they tend to know what they think, know what they believe, and the more they click on things that confirm what they believe to be true, the more kind of articles and content you're going to see that fills your feed with those things. So over time, what happens, I I fear, is that we're all just living in our own media bubbles and not really talking to people that disagree with us or see things differently than we do. And for young people, that means they're just going to be seeing content all the times that reinforces what they already think to be true. And you're 18 to 22. You know, you've got a lot more learning to do and a lot more experience to get, and your identity of who you are as a young person who's turning into an adult um, is going to be shaped by a lot of confirmation bias. And so, how do you grow intellectually in your knowledge base if you're just living in social media and it's constantly just feeding back to you a loop of what you already believe to be and are convinced of what is true? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Like a lot of social media create because of algorithms are feeding you things
Yeah.
you want to see. A lot of the things people are fed, it creates sort of this echo chamber surrounded by
Right.
yes men environment. And
Hmm.
then, do you think as well? I've kind of observed as I've gone more into the politics on the social media side of things that a lot of the people who are reporting on it, they don't have that equation of the expertise plus data
Right.
plus firsthand experience. It's almost heavily reactionary. They sort of see the
Yes.
headline, they make a video, they put it out there, and then it's fed to you. But then 2 days later, there's more information that comes out, and it turns out that what we initially thought was the case, what ended up not being the case. And then they don't post anything about it. And so you end up in sort of this both echo chamber space and then also in this space where people aren't being as objective as they can. It's you basically echo chamber and reactionary.
Yeah, you're
Um,
right. And and these algorithms reward outrage. They really do, and anger, and you know, um, and I get there's a lot to be angry about that's going on in the world, and there's a lot of things to be outraged about. I'm not trying to diminish that, but again, going, you and I are both followers of Christ, and the Scripture tells us that in your anger, don't sin, right? And an angry life isn't the kind of life that God honors, and that doesn't honor God. So to stay in a constant, perpetual state of outrage and anger is not healthy, in my view, psychologically, and it's certainly not uh, good for your spiritual health. And you start seeing people, um, we're seeing on social media where people unfriend and unfollow one another, and I see a lot of this. If you think this way, you can just unfriend me right now. I would see a lot of that. And you see things that people post on a social media platform that I know for a fact they would never say to a person face to face. So in a lot of ways, and since, back to your question, most young people are getting their news and information from these platforms. I fear that their view of themselves in the world does get skewed, um, and and I am deeply concerned about it. And again, you can't. I'm not suggesting at all that there's a way to put the genie back in the bottle and that people just follow traditional forms of media. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's here and it's here to stay. But you know, I can't manage Mark Zuckerberg, but I can manage myself. Matter of fact, as a follower of Christ, it is incumbent on me to exercise and to manage myself. Self control is a fruit of the spirit, and so it's on, and that involves all the realms of our lives, including how I engage with people, either face to face or on social media.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. I think it's yeah. And since we're on, I guess I'll just bring it up. Since we're on journalism and algorithms and everything, I've heard that there's a lot of kind of AI journalism that gets put out, and like you can type something up in ChatGPT and then put it out on Twitter, and you can like create this whole ordeal. Oh, how do you see AI affecting journalism? What are some unforeseen effects that it may have in the future?
Yeah, boy, another man. You're asking great questions, Ben, that are just so relevant and timely and topical. Um, Man, AI is cutting and swinging through any and every kind of knowledge based industry and profession. We're seeing its effects on the economy already. As an educator out here at UCF, we're certainly dealing with it. And every technology, whether it's an automobile or artificial intelligence, is a two-edged sword. It has benefits and it has detriments. Um, the benefits is that AI in some ways can make us more efficient and more productive. So, for example, uh, in the space where I work in journalism, you can use AI to take a television news script, for a television story that was aired, which is written in a totally different way than a news story that's in classically inverted pyramid that you would post online on the website or in the newspaper. AI gives us the ability to convert quickly that television script written one way and turn it rapidly into an inverted pyramid digital story for use in another way. And it does it in seconds. Now, we still have to edit that story. We still have to go through it because AI can hallucinate and turn the state of Utah into the word uterus. You know, so you still have to back read and be careful before you put it out there. But it does have ways of making us more productive in the work that we do as journalists. The detrimental side is that bad actors, and we've seen it already, can use AI for malevolent ends to persuade people to a point of view with just absolute falsehoods. And I've seen them in my feed of tsunamis wiping out Paris, and it is just completely AI and it's not true. And yeah, I with so many people on social media, you get concerned about uh, people's ability to distinguish what is true and what is not true with AI generated content. So there's great concern. We're having to grapple with it ethically. As an educator, I have stopped doing book reports because there's a good chance that the student's not reading the book, and they're just using chat gpt or copilot or something else to write the book report for them without reading it. So what's the point of that? I don't do book reports anymore. I make sure that in a lot of the journalism assignments that I do, that I'm requiring people to go physically to a scene to report something instead of just trying to uh, I have a saying that I use all the time in class. You can't report the news from Starbucks. So you got to get out of there and go see for yourself. So I keep relying on those kind of assignments that require students to go somewhere and see something and then write about it rather than just having um, a chat GPT rewrite a press release that the police department or the sheriff's office sent and slapping your name on the top and calling it news.
Hmm. Kind of, it's like taking, integrating into the that firsthand experience part of objectivity you were talking about, as opposed to just the data part. Um,
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's a challenge, though. It's a challenge, and it's like that. The genie's not going to go back in the bottle, and we're it remains to be seen what's going to be. It's stung some news organizations that have relied too much on it. I remember, I think it was last summer, the Chicago Sun-Times published a list of summer reading, top 10 or 20 or however many number it was, favorite summer reading books for your summer reading pleasure. And there were books on the list that didn't even exist. And it was AI generated, and then you're embarrassed and you got to go back and, publish a correction and, have to basically admit how goofy you were by, relying on AI to write this. So, I'm concerned that in the economics of the news business, as we see newsrooms inhabited by fewer people, that those people in a quest for productivity out of them will be forced to use AI to be more productive in ways that are counter to the mission of printing accurate information.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I've heard it said that AI should be used as an assistant, not as a worker. Like it's you really really useful for helping you continue something as opposed to helping you do something, right? Like it's one thing to say, "Hey, can you make sure that the grammar is correct on this essay?" and another thing to
Right.
say, "Write me an essay." Uh,
Yeah,
that
it's totally an assistive technology, and and everybody knows this now that's watching or listening. When you do a simple Google search now, you're getting the top result is an AI summary of what's out there, and man, I find that to be incredibly helpful in helping me find things I need to find quickly. So yeah, it's assistive technology when used, ethically and helpfully, but it can also be used malevolently um, to fool people or get them to think things. But look, bad actors have been around since before AI. You know, uh, the War of the Worlds in the 1920s, an old radio show, that was sounded like a newscast that Martians were invading New Jersey, and people panicked in the streets and believed it, and and it was a bunch of actors in a radio studio. So that that created panic and real harm. And so bad actors are going to use whatever tool is at their disposal to do bad things. And we just all need to uh, arm ourselves with good, sharp, critical thinking skills so that we're not easily fooled or misled.
hmm, that's good. So as you've been teaching your students and mentoring these young journalists, what are some of the big dilemmas that they bring to you, and what are some strategies that you give them to help resolve those issues?
I would say more and more, and I would say, Ben, especially since the height of the COVID pandemic, I get a lot more questions from my students about questions related to mental health. Um, when you're a journalist, the nature of the news is that you're going to find yourself, just like I did as a 23-year-old, encountering people who are dealing with death, who are dealing with some kind of trauma. You cover a fire that has burned an apartment complex to the ground and people are homeless, and they've lost everything they own. And part of telling that story is telling the impact of that story on the people who are affected by the event. So you're encountering people who are in real trauma. So doing that ethically, and we're doing more and more of that in our teaching here, what we call trauma informed reporting, so that you, number one, respect people as human beings first. They're not just a means to an end of you getting the story you've been assigned to do, they're human beings, and they're probably experiencing the worst day of their life. And for you to walk up to them, with some stupid question like, how do you feel? Or, what is this like for you? And not being sensitive to their needs at the moment is something that we're training more and more of our students to do the right way. And then also to teach them how to process what they see. Look, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world. My students they've been raised dealing with things that I never had to deal with when I was growing up in school. We never had mass shooting drills in my elementary, middle, and high school. It wasn't even a thing. That was never a thing. And, the students that I'm teaching, they've been raised since elementary school with having to do, live fire, mass shooting drills and lockdowns and all of that. When we went through COVID and, so many people and their families were affected either because either they died or got sick or they lost their job or what have you, and they were isolated. Everybody was sitting at home, and their whole world was staring at a screen for hours at a time. um, it was a bad time for all of us. And so students walking through the doors of this office that I'm in today oftentimes are they're asking questions about mental health. How do I stay mentally healthy doing this work? How do I process it? What are strategies for um, dealing with what I'm going to see as a journalist? And so I spend a lot of my time, more time than I used to, uh, trying to help young people traverse that and negotiate that. We had a young man who was in our program, a graduate of our program. His name was Dylan Lyons. He was a broadcast journalism student. He graduated in 2019 and got a job as a TV reporter up in Gainesville. Wonderful young man. Used to sit in my office right over in this chair all the time, would come in and talk. Uh, and he got a job in Gainesville, and then he came back to Orlando, got a job at a TV station here, was covering a homicide out in West Orlando one day. And the shooter had shot somebody and ran off and then returned to the scene. And this young man, Dylan Lyons, and his photographer, Jesse Waldron, were there. Dylan was writing his story on his laptop. And the suspect walked up to the car and shot them both, wounded the photographer, and Dylan was killed, shot him and died. And this was not far away. This was not in Mexico or Syria or Ukraine or Gaza or some other place overseas. It was right here in Orlando, and it was one of our own. And it hit really close to home. And so for weeks and months, we've dealt with students coming in saying, wow, am I going to be shot if I go out and do this job? In the our country is so polarized right now. I've had graduates who work in journalism who've had water bottles thrown at them while doing a live stand-up shot, or people cursing at them just off the street. So, they're dealing with, how do I deal with, hatred that's depicted or that's, sent my way just because I'm standing there with a microphone and a tripod and a camera doing my job. So there's just a lot of trauma and that's out there just because the world seems to be on fire, and there's a lot of violence. And the young people I'm dealing with have been raised in a fairly in a world where, even if shootings are rare, shootings of journalists are really rare, exceptionally rare, but because of the nature of everything's on our phone now, it comes to you. I mean, look at the shooting of Charlie Kirk. It was live and everybody was watching it, and it's right here on your phone. And so people are more and more dealing with trauma and and threats to their mental health. And as educators and faculty members, we're we're dealing and working with this all the time.
Hmm. What have you observed to be for people who are dealing with this trauma of having to navigate being called things and seeing sometimes horrific things happen in front of their faces? What are some ways that y'all have taught your students to to deal with that, to handle that?
Number one is to be make sure you're physically safe yourself. So there are safety protocols that we teach when you're going out on a story. Uh, and a lot of this, frankly, Ben, falls on the shoulders of newsroom leaders and managers, making sure that they're not sending their reporters and their photographers out in situations that are overtly dangerous. I mean, I tell my students, if you're at a crime scene or a place where somebody's been shot, when the cops leave, you need to leave. When the yellow tape comes down, you don't need to hang around. When the cops leave, you leave. Go back and do your stand up in front of the sheriff's office or the police station. Maintain your own safety. There's no story that's worth you uh, losing life or limb to get or to report. So, maintain your own safety. Whenever possible, go out in pairs. We're seeing, more and more, at least in television journalism and in smaller markets, TV markets, the employment and deployment of what are called MMJs or multimedia journalists. And that's someone who goes out by themselves with a laptop, a microphone, a camera, and a tripod. And they write the story, front the story, shoot the story, edit the story, put it online and on air all by themselves. And that can be really dangerous, especially if you're going out late at night or if you're going into neighborhoods that have a high crime rate. So whenever possible, go out in pairs. You know, Jesus sent his disciples out in pairs for a reason. So I think it's always good to, if you can, to go out in pairs. If you're a reporter, go out with a photographer, so that you can maintain safety. And one person is all the time can have their head on a swivel to be what's aware of what's going on around you. And then when it comes to dealing with what you've seen, it's really important that community is number one. To have, do you have someone that you can talk to, that you can share what you've seen? And is it someone who's experienced? Is it an editor? Is it a news director? Is it a colleague that you can talk to? I share with my students. I've been blessed to be raised in the Christian faith, where I've always had a community of fellow believers. And that's certainly true if you're Jewish or if you're of another faith tradition. Your faith can inform and nourish you and help you deal with the bad things you're seeing. Um, so, if do you have someone you can talk to? Some journalists that I've worked with, they go to therapy fairly often to talk to someone about what they're seeing. So it's important that you surround yourself with people, that you're not isolated, so that you can be reminded that what you do is important. But you do have to take care of yourself in your own head too, and deal with what you're seeing in a healthy way, because you're no good to anybody if you're broken and you're wrecked in your brain and
Hmm.
in your heart.
Hmm. Yeah, like seeking not just therapy, but making sure you're going with someone. What's the saying? Uh, Humans share burdens with each other, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, Christians, it's a scriptural mandate: bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. So we're to lean on one another. You got to have people in your life that you can lean on to deal with all the things in life that happen. And if you're a journalist, the some of the bad things that you see. So
Hmm. Hmm. What is the most impactful life lesson that you've learned?
wow, that's tough. I'm old, man. I've had a lot of lessons. I go back constantly. One thing that comes to mind is my dad, who he passed away in 2014. But my dad really taught me how to deal with people. And I remember being very young and him telling me something that his dad told him, and that is, son, you're no better than anybody else, but you also need to remember that there's nobody that's better than you. Which, my dad was a Republican, but when you think about it, that's a pretty small d Democratic outlook. Uh, there's nobody, you're no better than anybody else. So stay humble, but also remember that there's nobody better than you. So, you know, be upright and be proud of who you are. And that kind of duality has helped me throughout my entire life to deal with all kinds of people. And, as a journalist, you're dealing with people all the time. As an educator, I'm dealing with people all the time. I think that combination of um, being humble and being proud
Hmm.
at the same time, it's a tough line to walk, but thanks to my dad for that. And then as an educator, I think one lesson from scripture and from the book of Corinthians that has always been front of mind for me is where Paul said, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. You can be the smartest person in the world, but if you don't have love for people, it's a waste. Your knowledge is a waste because ultimately, what matters to our Maker is that we live lives of love, and that includes loving people that we disagree with, loving people who are difficult. Um, my whole religion is based on love. And so I can get as smart and add as many degrees to the end of my name as I have time to do. But at the end of it all, how I love and treat people in small ways or big ways is what ultimately counts to the one that we all ultimately answer to. So those two things I would say have been the lessons that have formed and shaped my life as a person.
Hmm. That's really good. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating, uh, balancing that line between having self-respect and confidence, but then also being humble enough to not become narcissistic and overly over the top. It reminds me of this concept I've been thinking a lot of, which is meekness and sort of embodying that. It's my understanding that meekness is almost the core of masculinity, and meekness and self-control appear to be the
Yeah.
core of that. And yeah, that's a really good.
Man, I appreciate you saying that because you don't usually equate those words, meekness and masculinity together, but my experience has taught me that they go together and they go a long way. And meekness doesn't mean you're run over. Meekness just means you're humble and you realize you don't have all the answers, that anybody can teach you if you're open, and if you listen. And my goodness, if as men, I would say that's been the hardest, can be the hardest lesson for us to learn is to listen. I remember, man, I don't mean to get off on a tangent. I remember early in my own marriage to my wife Ruth. We're coming up on 40 years
Wow.
of being in
Congratulations.
this thing. Thank you, being in this thing together. Early in our marriage, I was in grad school, and I went up to the McDonald's near our house to do some studying, and I was sitting there, and this couple came in to the McDonald's and sat at the table next to me. And so there was no way not to hear them, especially as they got kind of louder in their conversation. And what the conversation was centering on was that this wife was leaving this husband. Um, and it was clear to me from their interaction. And you don't know all of what goes on in a house, or between two people. There's always two sides to a story, but it was clear for me sitting there. I mean, I felt like I was, how when you witness an accident, a car crash, and it kind of rattles you. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I felt like I was seeing the wreckage of a marriage. And there was one thing that woman told her husband that has stuck with me forever, is she said, "You don't listen to me." You don't listen to me. And it was clear in their interaction for me as an outside observer that he wasn't listening to him to her, and probably, hadn't listened to her in the marriage. And she was leaving him out of frustration because he didn't listen. And I, after they left, I was shook and rattled. I mean, I was just a couple years into my marriage. I'm sitting there, tears with my half-eaten Big Mac there, and I just pray, God, let me never forget what I saw here. I saw carnage. I saw the wreckage of a marriage, and insofar as I'm responsible for my 51% of it, may I always be someone who listens, and know that is our Achilles heel as men, is the inability to listen, truly listen, to hear with our hearts and with our minds. And that has never been more challenging than today, when there's this and the television and so many other things that are vying for our attention, to truly listen, not only to our spouses, but to one another, in the church, in our communities, in our nation. Never been more important to listen.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a
We got 2 ears for a reason. The book of James, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. My God, that's the opposite of America in 2025. It's the opposite. Everybody is quick to speak, quick to get angry, and nobody wants to listen.
hmm. Yeah, it's a very difficult standard to live up to. How do you deal with that feeling of insufficiency that people feel when trying to live up to this high standard that we have, both in our relationships and in kind of everyday life?
Yeah. There's a phrase going around uh, called imposter syndrome, basically where you feel like you're faking it. Um, but I gotta say, I've dealt with that a good bit of my life. I remember when I got hired here as a faculty member, and became Professor Brunson. Uh, Honest to goodness, I to think, like, how did this happen? How did they let a newspaper copy editor, into the building to teach young people and mold young minds? And I just felt very inadequate to the task, and with each new arena or sector of journalism that I've moved into over the years, transitioning from newspaper to digital to television to radio and podcasting, each one has been a challenge. And with each step into those arenas, I've dealt with a certain degree of what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. There are people who are much better at this than you are. And what I have to constantly go back to is, remember that, like, David said in the Psalms, my strength is the Lord. And David all the time dealt with imposter syndrome, and was always in despair, and so I read a lot in the Psalms. I bury myself a lot in the Psalms, and gain um, confidence. The Lord is my confidence and is going to keep my foot from being taken. So I uh, realize that, like John the Baptist said, I'm not worthy to tie the shoes of the man who's coming down in here to be baptized by me right now. Um, I think it's to constantly put ourselves, those of us who believe, it's constantly to put ourselves in a place of humility before the Lord, and to cry out to him and say, God, whatever it is you've called me to, I need your strength and your ability to do it. Because as Christ said, apart from me, you can do nothing. None of us can bear fruit in our lives, in our profession, in our families, without remaining close to the Savior. And so I try to do that imperfectly. But I certainly realize it to be true that without doing that, I don't have the ability that I need to have to do the things to which I've been called to do.
Hmm. There's sort of this religion helps you find uh, adequate, sufficient meaning to deal with the concept, to deal with the feelings of insufficiency. Is that a good way of putting it?
That is, and if I were to show you, it's fun. I'll slide this around. Um, my wall facing me has a lot of the things I've over the years, Emmy awards and things um, that I've won, and I don't have them behind me where people can see them. I have them all on the wall across from me behind the door so that I can see them. Because every now and then I look over there, cast my eyes, and then, okay, wait a minute, Rick. There are people in this profession and in this world who do believe that you can do this. So, I don't put them behind me so people can see them. I put them on the opposite wall so I can see them, and remind myself daily is you're not faking it. You're not pulling off a caper.
Hmm.
You can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. There's kind of I think, a weird transitional phase from kind of who you are to developing kind of the transition between who you are to who you would like to be. And even like sitting down to do these podcasts and editing it and sending out things, it seems a little weird to me. There was a speech coach, I believe his name is Vin Giang, a Asian guy, really, really good. He teaches a bunch of stuff on communication. And one of the things he says is that people will respect you more, and your voice has a lot more presence when you make it as low as you can. But a lot of people don't do that because when they do, they think, oh, well, that's not me, I'm playing a character, I'm faking it. When the
Mhm.
reality of that is that you're not faking it, you're just playing a different note on the keyboard vocal range that you have. And it's good to kind of keep that in mind, that yes, you are going to change, and being yourself, being your past self throughout your whole life is not good. Like, you have to change, you have to develop, you have to become better. And yeah, there's just sort of this weird imposter, like, this is not me, this is not me. uh, Dennis Prager says you are what you practice, uh, or something along
Yeah, I
those
mean, that
lines.
goes all the way back to Socrates. We are what we continually do. And the more it's whether it's the weight room or the classroom, or the newsroom, reps are everything. Reps are everything.
Yes, sir. Yeah. How do you become courageous?
Wow. Um, yeah, I look at a lot of other people beyond me that are courageous. I mean, I think of, and I don't want this to sound like a cliche at all, but you know, I look at law enforcement officers and first responders and you know people in uniform who raise their hand and swear allegiance to defend the Constitution of the United States and then pick up a gun and go stand watch somewhere, or they're on a boat, you know, on a ship far away from their family. You know, those folks are courageous. Uh, where any courage that I have, you know, comes in daily small things, in the decision to speak up when you need to speak up because you uh, need to uh, stand for a principle that you think is important, or to defend someone you see on the street who's being abused by someone else, and you intervene, you know, in a way uh, that protects the other person. I mean, that's part love too, you know. In the New Testament, it says love protects. So we that's a little bit of courage. That's a little bit of love too. So for me, courage is in uh, those daily little decisions where you speak up for your principles in some way, um, when you know they may not be popular, or you're reading the room and the room's going the other way. Um, so whether that is in a faculty meeting, or whether that's with someone that you disagree with but you're friends with. I mean, there's that wonderful line in the Harry Potter films where I think Dumbledore says it takes courage to stand up to your enemies, but it takes a lot more courage to stand up to your friends. Uh, that's certainly true when you know someone that you walk with, but you you disagree with for a principled reason, and you know you take the risk to speak up. I think that takes uh, a, a modicum of courage. So um, you know, by sitting and being silent or avoiding confrontation, which I gotta say, I that comes right to my heart. I'm not a person who starts fights with people, or I mean, I will go 40 miles out of my way to avoid, you know, fighting with someone. But there comes a time when you have to, um, when you feel like a principle is at stake, that you need to act on it. Um, in journalism, man, I've reported with my name at the top plenty of stories that I've taken heat um, for some reason or another, and not because I got anything factually incorrect, but because somebody didn't like uh, the story, or they thought that I was unfair, or they thought that it was imbalanced, and they criticized me for it, and they should. I mean, you got to have a fairly thick skin to be a journalist, because nobody's gonna, not everybody's gonna love you. I remember when I after I graduated, and Ruth and I went to a film called Die Hard, the first original Die Hard, which I think it came out in 87 or 88. We hadn't been married all that long. I hadn't been a journalist all that long. And there's a scene at the end of that film where a TV reporter comes up to Bruce Willis's wife, played by Bonnie Bedelia, and he sticks a microphone in her face and you know asks that stupid question. This woman has been through hell, you know, for the entirety of this movie, and he asks her, "How do you feel?" And she rears back and she slugs the guy right in the mouth. We were sitting in a theater. The entire theater, this full theater, erupted in applause when she did that. And I kind of slumped down in my seat, and I leaned to my wife. I'm like, what have I gotten myself into? People were cheering that, this woman knocked this journalist, cold cocked him right in the face. And people were like, ah! And I was like, oh no, what am I? what line of work am I? That guy deserved a punch in the face, but I a lot of people have strong opinions about journalists, and I hear them. I hear those opinions regularly. I'm out eating dinner, getting coffee, and people say, "What do you teach?" Oh, journalism. I got something to say about that, and they give me an earful, and
Hmm.
you gotta be ready for that. That doesn't take courage. That just takes a thick skin.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's so. Would a good kind of summary of what you're saying be? You always speak the truth, no matter what, and you do it out of love for people, and well, no,
And
well, you,
because
yeah.
and for love, yeah, Ben, love for people, and but and love for what you believe to the best of your ability is the right thing. Um, so there comes times that you need to speak up when you see something that you think is wrong, or someone's being harmed, or there's a principle at stake that you feel is important. Um, it's important to speak up, and that can be around the family dinner table. That can be you know with a friend. That can be in the church. We're to speak the truth to one another in love, right? And that takes some some courage to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of reminds me of going back to the meekness thing we were talking about earlier. Uh, having the courage to stand up for what you believe, even amongst people that your friends, your family, and then to tie that into this, you do that out of a love for them and wanting for them to believe what is true, because ultimately that is the thing that will benefit them.
Hmm. Yeah, and you know it and it circles back to that humility thing again. The way we say it, the way we speak it. Um, I think if there's anger in your truth,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be received, and it's not going to be helpful. Again, as fellow believers, our charge is to speak the truth in love. Now, I've had people say, "I love you enough to tell the truth, so I'm going to slap you with this." Their whole approach doesn't feel to me like the recipient of as a recipient of the message that they love me at all. They're just trying to prove a point. They're trying to prove they're right. And so, we have to, when we take a stand and speak up, it always has to be from a place of love for not just for the truth, but love for the person that you are speaking to, and seeing them as someone. For me, I look at everyone as they are made in the image of God. I don't care who they are. They're made in the image of God. And because of that, they have intrinsic worth, dignity that I need to respect, no matter who they are. And um, so, how I speak to them is I'm speaking to a child of God. So, I better do it with love and care and respect.
Hmm.
And I'm not always great at it, but I think that's what we shoot for, and what we uh, we try to attain.
Hmm. That's good. All right, final question. Uh, as we're talking about families, loved ones, marriages, how to be meek. I've been thinking a lot about the sort of unseriousness that people take relationships, and
Mhm.
in particular the vows that they make in these relationships. What do you think? Uh, well, yes, because a vow is uh, fundamentally a sacred, solemn promise that you're making to someone. And
Mhm.
I often go to these weddings where people are vowing to make their partner like a cup of coffee. And it's yeah, again, it's weird because it's a big deal, and when you're vowing to make them something, uh, I don't know, it seems that there's an unseriousness around this. And so I'm curious, what are some vows you think people should make that they aren't making?
I think the most basic vow that is the, for lack of a better word, the sinew and muscle and lubricant of all close human relationships is keeping your word. Um, as it says in the scripture in the Psalms, keep, a man who keeps his word even when it hurts. So that is as simple as being very diligent that if I tell someone I'm going to meet them uh, at 5 o'clock to do a podcast, that I show up at 5 o'clock to do that podcast. If I tell someone that I'm going to meet them for coffee and conversation at 10 a.m., that I'm there, that I honor their time, I honor who they are as people. Um, that comes down to all of our relationships. It is the bottom is keeping your word. So if you're doing that um, with the people in your life, when it comes time to make the big one to someone that you're entering marriage with, um, you're going to have a track record of being the kind of person who knows what keeping your word means. Now, we all can fall short of that. Life happens. You make a mistake with your calendar, or and from time to time, we all fall short of that basic requirement of human relationships. But for the most part, if you take care of the little things, you're going to be able to take care of the bigger things. If you're not trustworthy in small things, you're not going to be trustworthy in larger things. So, keeping your word, being a person who is known for keeping your word uh, to everybody, whether that's a retail store clerk or a family member, you become a person who keeps your word. You do what you say you're going to do. You show up, you follow through, you follow up. If that becomes practice, as we were saying a minute ago, you become what you eventually do over and over. If you become that kind of person, when it comes times to make the big vow that you're going to hang in there with somebody for the rest of your life, and one day be buried next to them, um, it is part of who you are. And so uh, when my wife, looks at me, if she has confidence saying this is a man who keeps his word, she knows that I'm going to be around next year and the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, because I stood in front of her and looked her in the eye and said I would. And, we always make those vows in the church, at least under the eye of a watchful God. And we make that commitment to him and to our spouse, my wedding ring. And look, I'm by no means trying to make myself out to be a perfect husband. You could spend 24 hours with me and my wife and could see that I'm not. And if you were to get her on your podcast, she could recount all the ways that I fall short. So I'm not, trying to make myself out to be some kind of perfect husband here, but we chose, on our wedding bands, they've got three little diamond, nuggets. And we chose these intentionally because in our beliefs, it takes really three to make a marriage work. It takes two committed people, and it takes the Lord pouring out his grace and his love upon you to make it work. Marriages aren't made in heaven. They come to us in these little kits that we spend the rest of our lives making a marriage, and making a life together. So it takes three. And we've had the great fortune of, in times where I've let her down or she's let me down, we have a shared belief that we can turn to the Lord, who loves us both and who we believe put us together, and can find grace in our time of need. And so that's been our story, and we're sticking to it.
That's really sweet. Cool. So the two vows that you would recommend making are to be a man of your word.
Yep. Be a person of your word.
To put God before everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. Look, Ben, we're all dealing with ghosting. I get ghosted too. People say, I'm gonna be there, and they're not, or I just never hear from them again. And it's become so acceptable, and it's sad. It is so sad. In dating relationships, or you start a relationship, I get it. People are finding each other. I don't know what the stat is. 4 out of 5 marriages now started on a dating. I don't know if that's accurate, but a lot of people are finding love online, right? But you can swipe left, swipe right, and then breaking up with people by text. My God, I've never heard that. What a chicken poop way to to end a relationship with somebody by a text. My God, it's just it's the times we live in, and just the shallowness of people's relationships is just always astounding to me. That, and this whole thing of ghosting, just like I'll say I'll be there, or I'll say I'll do this, and then you just never. There's just so much of that. But here's the flip side of that, my man. If you're not a person like that, and you are a person who honors your word and values, your word and keeping your word, man, you stand out as just being countercultural and almost revolutionary. That that you're somebody who just does what you say you'll do. It causes you to stand out big time in the time in which we live.
Yeah, I want to say maybe it was Alex Hermosi who said this, but the bar for like greatness and success has never been so low, but also the bar to do absolutely nothing has also never been like easier to accomplish, right? Yeah,
mediocrity. It's so easy to be mediocre.
Your audio is cutting out a little bit. Oh,
sorry, man.
okay,
It's real easy to be really easy to be mediocre. Doesn't take much effort.
Yeah, and you can even I think he went on further to say that it's to a point where if you just try a little bit and you don't give up quickly, you will already be like in the top 1% of people, if not top 10%, just by trying a little bit, because the bar is so low.
So low. The expectations are just so low. I hear from this a lot, even, and I'm sure it's across all kind of professions, but even in the news professions, I deal with, especially in this media market, I know pretty much all the people who hire and fire that run, news organizations here in Central Florida, and even, in other places across Florida. And every now and then somebody will call me and say, "Hey man, can I take you to lunch? I need to understand um, the age cohort that I'm hiring from now, because man, I get ghosted all the time. They say they're going to come in for an interview, they don't come. And again, I don't want to generalize, because you can't generalize about generations. I've met just as many entitled 60-year-olds as I've met entitled 20-year-olds. But there's often this: how do I manage um, young people, because their expectations tend to be so different from what I experienced, coming up in this profession. So, uh, people change jobs at a drop of a hat. They uh, sometimes they don't even give like 2 weeks notice. I mean, a lot of the old standards of the workforce have drastically changed, and we're still trying to figure it out.
Hmm. Yeah, there's almost a degree of unetiquetteness, if that's a good way to put it.
Oh yeah, just rude, just rude. Oh yeah, I mean rudeness everywhere. Rudeness at the little league game. Rudeness on the highway. Rudeness, just rudeness all over the place. And and again, I try to, I'm not trying to be a Pollyannish about it, but if you're not rude and you're polite and you treat people decently and kindly with respect, boy, you shine.
Yeah. It's such a simple thing, and yet people don't do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I did too, Ben. It was great talking with you. And again, I'm just grateful that you reached out to me and had me on your podcast. And you just kind of asked some great questions and let me yak about it. so so I really appreciate you, the privilege of coming on and sharing my voice with your audience. And I love what I love that you're getting into this really cool sector of media podcasting. It's a lot of fun, uh, and I wish you success as you go forward.
Thank you very much.